Parenting is the process of eliminating your child's need for you. So I'm not saying that it will end your relationship. What I'm saying is that our job is to equip them to live without us. And that's the parenting process. And that's a picture of leadership, is that you're preparing those who are coming behind you to replace you, to take what you have and go further with it.
Hi, you're listening to the Zan Tyler podcast.
When my husband and I decided to homeschool our children, one of the hardest decisions was choosing resources and curriculum. BJU Press Homeschool was the answer. My kids are drawn to the colorful illustrations and interesting facts. They look forward to their video lessons. The teachers are so creative and the special characters hold their attention. My youngest is a hands-on learner. Each of her subjects has engaging activities. The Bible and biblical principles are woven throughout the curriculum. It's not just a verse here and there. It's in the illustrations, the stories, the example problems. BJU Press has all the core subjects we need for kindergarten through 12th grade, and some fun electives too. They give me the freedom to choose what's best for each of my kids. A full grade kit with distance learning videos for one. For another, I'm going to teach most of the subjects and use videos just for math. BJU Press Homeschool has made it possible for me to be a wife, a mom, and an educator.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast. I'm your host, Zan Tyler, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited today to have Roger Smith with me. Roger has been practicing internal and pediatric medicine since 1989, and he was just chosen as the Louisiana Rural Doctor of the Year. He and his wife, Jan, are the parents of 4 grown children that they homeschooled from kindergarten through high school, and they now have 6 grandchildren. Jan and Roger have also served on the board of the Louisiana Homeschool Association and NCFCA, which is a Christian Homeschool Debate League. Roger recently authored his first book, Parenting with Influence, which we will talk about later on today in our podcast. So, Roger, it's so great to have you here. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to interact with you, and anytime we can be together, and even if it's over these waves of internet. So it's great to see you.
That's right. So Roger, we so Roger and Jan are 2 of mine and Joe's very best friends, and we have this loose organization we call Travel with a Purpose, because we often find ourselves traveling the country or the globe together over homeschooling issues. Just recently, it was really cool. The 4 of us spoke at a conference together in Manitoba, and we were the 4 keynote speakers, Joe and I and Roger and Jan, and it was their first real in-person event since COVID. So that was really fun, wasn't it, Roger?
It was, just first of all, having the interaction with the crowd, and they were so lively and so eager to interact after being shut down for so many months. And then we also had the chance to really get to know some of their communities. And that was really interesting, because there are so many things there that are, they're different than the Deep South.
Yeah, yes, and so unique. It was really great. It was just like you say, it was such a great time of ministry together. But I want to talk about another trip we had together. I guess this was 2019, maybe 2018. We were, Roger and Jan and Joe and I were asked to go on a missions trip to a couple of communist countries. And so we were invited to talk about homeschooling at a number of churches. And the little caveat that made this so interesting is that homeschooling was illegal where we were speaking. So I can remember when our host asked me to go, I said, so if it's illegal, what are we going to be talking about there? And he said, well, Zan, we're going to be talking about homeschooling. And I said, okay, but didn't you say it was illegal? And he said, listen, this isn't your first rodeo. You were threatened with jail here in the United States for homeschooling. So I felt a little less protected, because there were no fourth amendment rights or due process laws in effect to protect us, but the Lord was good to us, wasn't he?
It was a fun trip, and I loved seeing the kind of the first thoughts of people encountering the idea of homeschooling. The classic, the one lady that we had in the second group that we addressed, she was seemingly very hostile and very negative about any idea of the parents teaching their children, and that couldn't work, and that was an impossibility. But as the day wore on, she heard the heart of the homeschool parent and the heart of the parent toward the child, and how wholesome that it was, and it just, she blossomed like a flower. And at the end of the day, it was like she didn't want us to leave, and she wanted to talk more about it. And so that was the most dramatic part of it, is that it wasn't, we didn't talk about it from the standpoint of the academic success. We talked about it as how much it impacts the family, and that's what we can all identify with. We want our families to be close and warm and connected.
Love each other. Yeah, that's exactly right. So it was really surprising. I really didn't know what to expect. I can say I was a little worried when we left, but it was just a really special trip.
It was. It started with a bang when we got off the plane and saw machine guns.
That was the story I was going to get you to tell. So we're in one airport. Roger pulls out his phone to take a selfie of the four of us just standing outside the airport. And before we know it, we are surrounded by...
Yes, these uniformed guys that said, "No photo, no photo." He knew that. He knew that little bit of English.
Machine guns, yeah. It
That's
was
right.
like, these were not pistols; these were machine guns, and there were more machine guns than there were the four of us. So
that's right.
So
that got our attention really fast. We said, "We're not in Kansas anymore."
And we stayed in a posture of prayer the whole time we were there. But it does make us, we developed a lot of friendships with people while we were there that we still keep in touch with, all four of us. And it in the first place, it makes us appreciate the freedom we have in this country, even in spite of everything we've been through as a culture the last few years. And it reminds us that freedom is an amazing thing, and we need to pray for our friends and our Christian brothers and sisters around the world. So, Roger, tell me how you and Jan started homeschooling, when you started homeschooling, and how you got into homeschooling.
Well, we all had an introduction somewhere to the idea, and we were teaching Sunday school at our church when I was in medical school. We had a 5th and 6th grade class, I believe it was, and we were having a Saturday afternoon party at our little duplex apartment. And at that same time, we were expecting the arrival of a new associate pastor it was coming to us from Oregon. He was a seminary friend of our pastor. And so he came by the house, dropped off his children that were in the 5th and 6th grade age group, and went on to do other things. That was these children's first introduction to Louisiana. And but they were bright, they were engaging, they were not afraid of the adults, they weren't afraid of the children, they were knowledgeable. I said, something is different about these children. Let's get to know them. And lo and behold, they were home educated. And that was our introduction to home education. And we said, there's something going right in this process, and we need to understand this. And this was before we had children, so not even school age children. We had no children at all. But Jan was so, she was frustrated with her school experience. She was bored most of the time. And so when she heard of homeschooling, she was the early adopter. It says, here it is. This is the way we're going to educate our children, because we don't want to make them endure, the slow pace and of school. at any rate, that was our introduction. And so several years later, after we had encountered other families, and we said, okay, this can be done. This looks wholesome. And it allowed us to live in a certain type of way because I had a busy practice. My schedule was crazy. And so it afforded us the opportunity to have time with our children on the schedule that I had by force. I didn't have a lot of choices. And so we adjusted. It gave us the opportunity to not only control the content of their education, but also the timing of it. And so it was a great fit for us. And we were nervous and scared, just like everybody else that gets started. But it made all the difference for us.
Hey, Roger, tell us how you organized your time in the morning so that you had time in family devotions with your kids
Yeah.
before you went to the office
Yeah.
or the hospital or wherever you were going.
We didn't start this way. Actually, I'll tell how we started. My goal was to be at the hospital by 6 a.m. And so children are normally not up at 6 a.m. So, I started at a, kind of like at a sprint in the morning, 7 o'clock, and I was going nonstop. I would come home for lunch, and my office was just a block and a half from the house, so I could come home for lunch, have a little window of time with the children and Jan before I went back to the office, and then it was till 8 o'clock at night. So Jan went to a homeschool conference one year that I was not able to go, and she interacted with one of the speakers who talked about the value of the father setting the spiritual tone of the day. And she said, my husband leaves at 6, and he said, well, I think you ought to get the children up at 5. She said, don't you think that's a little legalistic? He said, oh, no, I don't think you have to do it. I just think that it would bless your family. Well, we didn't get the children up at 5, but it made us think about, is there another way of doing our day? And so I reordered some things that I could control, and I took that lunchtime that I was coming home with the family, and I moved my hospital rounds to that time period so that I could start my day with the children at 7. They did get up at 7. And so we would have a breakfast together. I would lead a spiritual discussion. Sometimes it was very simple. Other times it was more involved, but nonetheless, I started the day with the children with some scripture memory, some scripture story. Maybe we discussed the ideas of a hymn and the lyrics of the song, any number of things. But it wasn't so much the content that we covered, but it was the atmosphere that it set for the day, that this was important to me and this was important for our family. And so it gave us a good time to get the day started. And we look back on that time as pivotal when we made that change.
Pivotal and precious. And the years passed so fast. I used to hate it when I was a young mom and people would say, enjoy the time you have with your children, because sometimes you have so much pressure as a homeschooling mom or dad. You feel like it's just never going to end. Your whole life is going to be like this pressure cooker all the time. Yep. And then one day your children do walk out the door to assume their own lives. And you're so glad you had that time.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, Roger, do you have a favorite Bible verse or a corralling spiritual principle that was important to you as a homeschool dad?
Oh my goodness, Zan, you shouldn't have blindsided me with this one. I have a mantra, and my heart would just start beating out of my chest as I started thinking about it. My mantra came out of Proverbs, and at the moment I can't think of the reference. I think it's 16th chapter of Proverbs. It says, "What is valued in a man is his kindness." And that really has been tall marching orders for me, is because I just felt like whenever I read that in college, I was reading the scriptures, memorizing a lot of things, and that passage to me jumped out of the page. It was like as someone shouted into my ears this is what your life should be described as: kind. And it marked my path, that kindness is a key component, and that's something that we talked with our children about. That's something that we continue to work on, being kind with others, kind in our words, kind in the way we think about others. And so that did color a lot of the interaction we had with the children. Even whenever they were in
Acting
a
out.
tussle. Yes, I was trying to figure out a comfortable word here. When they were in conflict with one another, we needed to resolve the conflict, but we needed to resolve it in a kind way. And so that colored everything. Kindness with their friends. That doesn't sound like a parenting verse. But
Oh my
for us,
goodness,
it
Roger,
was.
but it describes who you are, and it describes
Yeah.
who your family is, and it explains why you were the choice for the Rural Physician of the Year, because you not only are that way with your parents, you're that way with your friends, you're that way with your patients. You're one of the kindest people I know. And so
Well,
that's pretty powerful. That is powerful.
yeah.
One
Well,
thing
thank you.
you talked about conflict. This wasn't in like what we talked about, but I remember Emily, your daughter. Jan and Roger have 3 boys and a daughter, Emily, whom we love. And she said one time that one of the favorite things you did in your family was family court. Will you explain that will you explain that to what family court is?
Yes. Yeah. We didn't come up with the name. The children came up with the name. They called it family court, and we didn't know what to call it. We just knew that we did not want them to come to physical blows, and that yet we had to deal with conflict because it happens. It's just a normal part of life, and it is not something. It's not a sign that your children are wicked or bad or that things are wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that things are going well, that there is friction, there's movement, progress produces friction, which, anyway. So anytime we started this very early, we felt like it's better to deal with trouble in shovelfuls rather than truckloadfuls. And so any conflict, we'd say they were fighting over who got the pencil, and we saw one did, there was things that happened. So we said, okay, sit down, you're going to face one another, and someone gets to talk first. We chose who got to go first. It didn't, I don't know how we chose, but sometimes it might've been who seemed to be the biggest, the one causing the most trouble. But anyway, one person said, okay, we'd say, what happened? And this person would say, who did what, who said what, and then we'd say, then what did you do? Because they would always talk about the other person.
Right. That's right.
So we'd say, then what did you do? Or what did you say? And they would describe it, and we'd say, how do you think they felt when you did or said that? And they would have to describe it. He said, is that what you wanted? So we went back and forth with these little questions. This one person, the other person couldn't answer. We said, no, you got to listen. So it taught them to listen. And then when it came their turn, we turned to them and said, okay, so what do you have to say? What do you think happened? And they would get to tell their part. And we could say to the other person, is that true? If they told a different story, you can say, is that true? So it was a process of we learning to ask the questions, and then we would ask them, how do you think that made the other one feel? We would name them, say, how do you think they felt when this happened? So we wanted them not only identify their own feelings and their own thoughts, their own loss, but we wanted them to learn to be able to think about the other person's loss. And so it was an ongoing process, and it seemed like it would never end. Whenever they're little, it's conflict at every turn. But we felt so that it was the most important thing that we did with our children, to help them to know how to manage conflict and not try to destroy the person who they were in conflict with. And so later in life, every one of the children especially the first two, have said in their college relationships, they would see things happen and they'd say, hey, wait a minute. Why did you say what you said? What do you think that person felt? They were doing the same things with their friends that we had done because they could see the benefit to trying to understand the communication pattern and helping people to move to a more resolution mindset, a kinder approach to issues. And so there wasn't a prescription. We didn't have a script. No one taught us how to do this. We probably, caused some emotional trauma to those children, but, really.
No, and I think on the outside looking in, when you're homeschooling, you see all these other families out in public and you think these are perfect families. And I
Yep.
want my family and my children to be perfect too. But what you don't realize is by homeschooling, you're really inviting more conflict than less conflict because you're home
That's right.
together all the time. And
That's
the
right.
value in that, I mean, if you're all in different places 8 hours a day, there's a whole lot less conflict because nobody's together. But there's real benefit in being together and resolving that conflict and learning to love each other, just like you were talking about.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we saw is that families who were going to be putting their children on the bus in the next 15 or 20 minutes, they could avoid the conflict. They could just ignore it, and not really resolve it. But when we were going to be there looking at one another all day, we had to deal with it. And so we learned little by little how to resolve it. And so that's one of the huge benefits, I think, of home education is that you have enough time to learn how to communicate with one another, and learn how to forgive one another, learn how to, tolerate is a bad word, how to love one another.
And live side by
different.
side. Yes. And understanding. That's right.
That's right.
Absolutely. All right, Roger, there's one other thing that y'all did such a great job of teaching your kids that I want to talk about for just a minute. And that is you and Jan are quite the entrepreneurs, and you taught your children how to run businesses of their own. So talk about how that came about, there was a lawn business, there were rental property, and how you involved your children.
It started real small, and that there's a real benefit to that. Is that there's this old adage that I learned when I was in college. Says, "Grow into business, don't go into business," and that really described how we did with entrepreneurial mindset. Is that that the oldest child really kind of got us started. We weren't planning to go down this path that early, but at 7 years old, he had seen me mowing the yard, and he thought that looked like lots of fun. And there was a vacant lot on the corner of between our house and my office, and it was being uncared for. And he said, he looked up at Jan and said, "Mom, can I mow that yard?" And we thought, "What? You're too little." And so she, thinking that it would end it, said, "Well, if you can show me that you can mow our yard, then I'll let you see about mowing that other person's yard." And of course, that corner lot was totally vacant. It had no obstacles or anything, no trees, no flower beds, nothing. And so she got him out in the backyard, and we gave him some safety lessons and got the lawnmower started. And he lo and behold, that little red-faced, sweaty boy, he was determined to prove to us that he could use that lawnmower, and he did. It took him a little while, but not very long. A few attempts, and we went, "Okay, I guess you can do this." And so, but we said, this is more than just mowing grass. This is a mindset of he's going to mow that yard, and it's a value to someone else. So let's teach him about how business works. So he wrote a letter to these people who owned the lot. They didn't live in our state anymore. He said, "Can I mow your yard for you? I'll do it for such and such a fee." He would have done it for nothing, but it was a value to them. And so that began the business of him learning how to write an invoice and a letter to the people, receive the money, and then we had to figure out what was he going to do with that money, where did he keep it, how did he plan to use it, so that started with just small amounts of money, but we had some other little projects and they were getting a little bit more money. We said, okay, we got to have a bank account. So we got them a bank account. They wrote checks and they were 10 and 11 years old. They bought their own equipment for the lawn business and they went and recruited their own lawns. I don't know what people were thinking when they showed up and there was these 10-year-old kids saying, can we mow your yard? But they did. So it started that way. And little by little, we involved them in more and more things that we were doing as a family, that some of our family businesses. And so they learned to handle money and not be impressed with the fact that there was a stack of bills and bills as in cash. So we didn't want them to be impressed with money. So they needed to handle it and know what, go into the bank and talk to the bank people. And so that the business world was not frightening and unknown to them. And so it started with one vacant lot on the corner, and little by little, before long, they had their own businesses.
It is interesting because it does take the intimidation factor out of things. I know that when I was lobbying, the boys would come with me. And so many people aren't involved politically because it's intimidating. Same reason people don't start their own businesses. It's intimidating.
Right.
They lived at the State House long enough with me that they weren't intimidated and they weren't very impressed either. And it gave them a heart for the law and public policy and those types of things.
Yeah.
But Roger, I know that your kids also worked with rental property with you.
Yes.
Learned how to fix things and build and...
I had two reasons for getting rental properties. One, my oldest son wanted to speak for a living. And I said, okay, you could possibly make a living speaking, but that comes and goes. Even the best, the most productive professional speakers are going to have time periods where there's no events. I said, you've got to have some foundation to your income. So we need to find a passive form of income. And so, I learned about, we went to some real estate conferences and to learn to say, okay, could this possibly work? And he was 15 at the time. And he was already dreaming of writing and speaking. And so we investigated that. And one, it was for future income for him. But secondly, I was determined that I wanted them, whenever they started their family and when they bought their first house, that they would know more about the house itself than I knew when I built the house that I live in now. I didn't know enough. And so we bought properties that they could learn to fix the plumbing and do some electrical work and, repair the floors and hang a door and replace a window pane and any number of things that, on a rental property, it doesn't matter if you get it not quite right. You want it to work, but if it's not perfect, it's a good place to practice. So that was one of the reasons that we got the rental properties, is so that they could learn how to do some simple things. And I told them, I don't care if you ever do this another time in your life. When you hire somebody to do this at your house, you at least know what you're hiring them to do, and you know what its value is. Maybe you never want to crawl under a house again and fix a drain pipe. But you at least know what's involved, and you'll know which ones you don't want to do yourself.
And it's such an important part of their education, along with the bookwork. And I know that academics are important to you and Jan. You're both well-educated people, but the things you did for your kids in teaching them how to fix things, how to run businesses, just real life skills are things that, is just one of those benefits of homeschooling that might not be apparent to people on the outside looking in. And so moms and dads, if you've got young kids, you have so much to look forward to in terms of the things you can teach them as a part of their school day, these life skills. People don't have life skills anymore.
Right. And, I didn't have some of the life skills that I wanted my children to have, so we learned together. So, and YouTube saved the day.
Yes.
Anytime we go, I don't know what to do here, we would go to YouTube and look at some things and try to figure it out. And then, and so we also were not afraid to fail. That was another thing, is that it's okay to fail. It's okay to make a mess of something. And we just had fun making a mess. If we tore up something, we just knew that, okay, we tore that up, and that was the cost of the lesson. So that fear of failure, they say Michael Jordan, the reason why he was such a basketball great is that he had no fear of failure, and that, he missed more shots than he made, and, and many other things. But his claim to fame is that he was not afraid to fail. And that's one thing that we wanted our children to know, is failure is not final.
Oh, that's powerful. I know another thing that you had your kids involved in was 4-H. And not everybody in the country has access to 4-H, but I just know what your kids learned through raising animals. You have horses, all types of life lessons along those lines as well.
Sure. And 4-H has really changed a lot, because they realized that it could no longer be just cows and curtains, because, and I stole that from them. That's not original to me, but nonetheless, the old thought about 4-H was that it was livestock and sewing and, cooking and things like that. But they have moved to more leadership, communication, even technology, and computers, and any number of technological projects and activities and learning opportunities. But for our children, we found, not just in 4-H, but any youth organization that has been around a while, they're focusing on leadership development alongside all of these different skills. So our children did raise some livestock, but mostly what they learned was how to interact with professionals in their field. And so if they were competing with the livestock, they had to interact with a veterinarian. They had to interact with someone who was a specialist in the feed, or or the performance of the animal, or different things. And they were adults, but they began to be unafraid to ask the specialist to help them. And
all right, so I'm going to interrupt you here, because I think that these are such important life lessons too. Again, it's not always something you think about when you think about homeschooling. Is your children are not in a room with 20 other people their same age who are limited in knowledge, just like they are. They're exposed to the adult world, and they learn how to interact with adults, and they learn how to talk to adults and think like adults, and they learn to become adults. And I just think that's really powerful. Roger, this is a great segue into your book, talking about how our children learn how to deal with adults and leadership. So the name of Roger's book is Parenting with Influence: Shifting Your Parenting Style as You and Your Child Grow. Because in your book, you say that parenting is really about leadership, which that quote, I studied leadership, that quote really caught my attention. So tell me why you say that in the book.
Well, the parent's role is, I describe it this way. Parenting is the process of eliminating your child's need for you. And that sounds rather shocking, but in reality is that we're helping them to adulthood where they really don't need us anymore. They can live without us. But naturally, as long as we're alive and we're in great relationship, there'll be times that they call upon us and get our advice or our perspective, or just want to have our approval. So I'm not saying that will end your relationship. What I'm saying is that our job is to equip them to live without us. And that's the parenting process. And that's a picture of leadership, is that you're preparing those who are coming behind you to replace you, and or to take what you have and go further with it. And so that's just a picture of leadership. And so we that's why I say parenting is leadership.
Well, okay. So one of the things I love about your book is you talk about the difference in having rules and regulation and having relationship with your children. And I know that there are times when our children are young that they have to have rules so that they don't hurt themselves. But you also talk about the importance of relationship. This is a parenting book, but the thing that you and I both love about homeschooling the most is that it develops relationship with our kids.
Yeah,
So
there's no doubt.
so talk for just a minute about how we move from rules to influence.
So early in the child's life, their developmental understanding really is more about behavior, and so the external components, whether they can touch the hot stove or whether they can crawl across the room or what, it's all about the physical outworkings. But in reality, is we're moving to the point where not only are they just not able to do something physically, but we want them to think right about it. We want them to make good decisions. We want them to have desires and goals that drive them forward. And that's more of a intangible, but that's not where children start. So we start with just teaching them to control, to limit their physical activity. And so it is very rules based. You can't do this. You can't do that. You got to sit in the car seat. You have to, any number of rules. It just seems like it's an endless number. Well, maybe not endless, but there are a lot of rules in the early stages.
Yeah.
A lot of rules in the early stages. And we establish control. And I relate it a lot to the way we are with horses, is that as we're training a horse and we start with one that has never been ridden, we have a lot of very rigid ways of handling it so that we teach them what to expect and what is desired behavior and desired responses. And the more they understand that, the more freedom we give the horse, more options for response. And so looking, not to say that children are horses by any means, but it's just a picture of how early on it's much more focused on rules. But the more competent we become with rules, the more free we could become, or we should experience with it. So it's like driving a stick shift car. At first, if you've ever driven a manual transmission, many of our listeners may have never driven a manual transmission, so that may be not a good example. So, but at first, you have to think about, push it on my clutch foot, and then I have to push it up, put it up in first gear, and lightly let off a clutch at the same time. You're thinking about all the little components of it, but every little move is almost like a rule. And but before long, you're shifting gears and don't even remember that you have shifted the gear because it has become ingrained. And so the more we know what is desired behavior, the more we spend our time on the character and the inner qualities that's going to help them to make their life decisions. So as they grow, we have to shift in how we relate to them. And that's the whole premise of the book, is that children are changing and growing, and we've got to change and grow with them. And if we're trying to handle an 18-year-old the same way we'd handle a 6-year-old, we are making a mistake and messing up, and we are actually creating a lot of trouble for ourselves, not only the child. And so that's what we tried to explain, that the transition process.
I love what you say in the book. Relationship is the key to preventing or resolving resentment and rebellion. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Let me reread that. Hold on. Relationship is the key to preventing or resolving resentment and rebellion.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah. Our relationship is not about rules. And, that's part of our experience with our children. But relationship is our valuing of one another, and knowing one another, and realizing, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and hoping the best for one another. And so I talk a lot about that in the book. But the basis of influence, which is what I have and what you have with your children today. Okay, you don't have rules for your 40-year-old son. I guess he's a little older than that now. Anyway, but he's in that range. So mine are in their late 30s. So anyway, so we don't have rules for our children. Our relationship is an influential relationship, and that's rooted in how we see one another. And so little by little with our small children, we have to be building that relationship that we can depend on for the years where we can no longer control them. We lose control naturally.
That's right.
So what we're left to work with is influence. And that's rooted in the relationship. That's
Yes,
right. And
that's
so if we don't work on the relationship, if all we ever work on is the rules, then we're on a path to lots of trouble.
It's interesting because you talk about doing your internship in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yeah.
Our daughter Lizzie went to a college not far from Lexington.
Right.
And you talk about Joseph Beth booksellers in here. That was my favorite bookstore in the entire world. I couldn't believe we also had that in common.
Wow. So we didn't even know the name of the bookstore. All I knew was we were too poor to buy a book from there, but they had a lot of books. And when we were hopeless, and when when we felt like we did not have the tools to do a good job as a parent, I sent her down there one very discouraging night to say, go read get some ideas from somebody else. And she pulled down the Strong-Willed Child by James Dobson and sat there and cried at the end of a row.
Sat on the floor and read. Yeah.
That's right. Sat on the floor where no one could see her, crying, searching for some help, some hope. And she, we didn't find a solution. And sometimes the solution is not, some trick or some immediate fix that if we do this one thing, everything will be fine. What she found out is that even in the midst of it being very, very hard, we were doing a lot of things right. And that we just needed to give time for both us and our child to grow. And that gave enough hope just to kind of hang in there. And parents get tired. The conflict
is hard work. Yes.
Wears you down. And you think, nothing is happening here. I see nothing good happening, but we lose perspective. We just lose perspective. And that's what she gained that night sitting in Joseph Beth bookstore.
Because she couldn't afford to buy the book.
We couldn't afford to buy the book.
That's right.
I think eventually we got a copy, but at that time we were choosing between milk and gas money. And
right, because you were doing your residency.
That's right. Yeah, we were poor as church mice. And I don't even know where that phrase came from, but anyway.
It's a good one.
So she would catch a ride to the grocery store so that she didn't have to buy gas to go. And so that little bit that we would save, we could buy another gallon of milk.
And, now it's interesting what the Lord has done for y'all at the main place. And you have a home where you practice hospitality to hundreds of people a year. It's really a gift. So there's one thing I want to say in the book. There are two things I want to point people to in the book. One is just this comment where you say that Jan prepared your children to succeed. That is so powerful to me because that's not often how we think about preparing our children, preparing them to succeed. And sometimes we get depressed by the way we see them progressing, and we forget that it's a long game. Yeah. Gosh, I just love that, Roger. That is so good.
So how that actually played out Um, and that sounds like a very giant task, but when she broke it down, our favorite example of it was in my residency. We oftentimes had a picnic. Once a year they would have something where it was pleasant for us. And so Jan would bring the children to the picnic, and all the other faculty would be there, the residents, and she would explain to them who was going to be there, what was the desired behavior, what was going to be allowed, what were things that might frighten them. She helped them to know before they got out of the car what was desired behavior, what would honor us. And so it was little things like that that helped them to succeed in that encounter. And she would do the same thing at the grocery store, when she went to the doctor's office, or anywhere she went. She was masterful in setting them up for success, and not waiting till they were out of bounds and then being angry with them.
I think that's a principle we can use throughout our lives with our kids and our grandkids.
Yeah.
In every situation, whether it's small or huge, thinking how we can set them up for success. Hey, listen, there's one other thing I want to talk about in your book. Again, this book is Parenting with Influence, and in a minute, Roger, I'm going to get you to tell people how they can get a copy of it. But at the end, there's an appendix, open-ended questions and conversation fuel, and it teaches you how to ask questions of your children at different ages. This is worth the price of the book right here. So and Roger, you're the master question asker. I can still see you when we went on, we were on a cruise with the Florida Home Education Association, and I can still see you with your cards that were questions to ask people at dinner time. So you're a master at that. But this part of the book is just worth, to me, the whole price of the book. I've pulled it out, and I'm going to be using it with my grandkids, who are all different ages, at dinner the next time they come over. So, Roger, tell us how people can find you and how people can get a copy of your book.
My website has my name in it, rogersmithmd.com. And so at that website, we have the book for purchase. We'll have other things. I'm going to put together some conversation cards also that will be available. And we use those whenever we have people over. We will have things to guide the conversation. We'll give everybody, or let them draw a card, and it's something just to keep us from talking about the same old things over and over and over. And so learning to have conversation is one of those things. So at rogersmithmd.com. The book is also available on Amazon. So I understand now. My son bought one off of Amazon. I said, I would have sent you one. And he said, anyway. So now I know it was supposed to be on Amazon. So you can find it on Amazon, but you also can get it directly from us at rogersmithmd.com. One other thing we haven't talked about is I do have this Facebook video blog with parenting tips, and so I usually give a 2 to 4 minute video on one little parenting tip, and I seek to do those weekly. That's on Facebook at Parenting Matters Now. Parenting Matters Now.
Yeah, and those are fabulous. If you've not seen those by Roger, I really encourage you to tune into those. Those are great. Well, Roger, thank you so much for being with me today. You and Jan have been such encouragements to Joe and me, and I know you encouraged parents here today. So thank you so much for being with us.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure.